What if I told you that Mercedes could lose everything just before the Japanese GP? Not because of a lack of performance, but because they went too far with an idea that no one else dared to execute. Because what seems simply a brutal advantage on the straight actually hides a hidden mechanism in the front wing that is currently under investigation, that Ferrari has already put its sights on, and that could be illegal at any time. The big question is, are we seeing an engineering masterpiece, or the most controversial trick of the entire new era of Formula One? Mercedes didn't get to this point by chance. And that's the first thing you have to understand to really gauge the problem they're in right now. Because if one looks only at the results, one might think that they have simply found a competitive car, fast on the straight and solid in the race, but the reality is much deeper, much more worked, and also much more risky. Since the end of 2025, the team has already been exploring ways to make the most of the new 2026 aerodynamic rules, especially in everything related to low resistance modes on the straight, looking for an advantage that did not depend solely on the engine or the setup, but on how the car behaves in the transition between curve and straight, which is precisely where races are won or lost in modern Formula One. The context is key because these new regulations require both the front and rear wing to work in a coordinated manner, changing their configuration in a matter of milliseconds to go from maximum load to minimum resistance. In theory, all teams have access to this system, but what Mercedes has done is completely reinterpret how that change should be executed. While the rest simply comply with the transition immediately and synchronized, Mercedes has found a way to break that critical moment without breaking, at least apparently, the written regulations. And that's where it all begins. During the Chinese Grand Prix, the first suspicions began to take shape. It was not an official statement or an immediate protest. It was something quieter, more technical. Engineers, analysts, and even specialized content creators began to notice strange behavior in the car when exiting the curves onto the straights. It wasn't just that he was fast, it was how he achieved that speed. There was an intermediate phase, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, where the car seemed to maintain unusual stability while already beginning to release aerodynamic resistance. That did not fit with what the regulations dictate, much less with what the other teams were doing. From there, everything exploded. The onboard cameras and slow-motion replays began to reveal what had been hidden until then. The Mercedes front wing did not respond at the same rate as the rear wing. While one was already in low-load mode, the other continued to generate support for longer than allowed. It wasn't a bug, it wasn't an accidental delay, it was consistent behavior repeated lap after lap, which made it clear that there was design behind all of this. And when the times began to be measured, the difference was even more scandalous, almost double the limit established by the regulations. This discovery completely changes the narrative because we are no longer talking about a simply efficient car, but one that is exploiting a gray area of the regulations in an extremely aggressive way. And this is where Ferrari comes in because it didn't take long for them to raise their voices. Not as a simple complaint, but as direct pressure for the FIA to investigate whether this system is legal or whether, although it technically meets certain parameters, it is violating the spirit of the rules designed to maintain competitive equality. And all this happens at the worst possible time, just before the Japanese Grand Prix. A circuit where aerodynamics is everything, where any advantage in stability and transition can make enormous differences, and where Mercedes arrives with a weapon that could be decisive or completely eliminated from one moment to the next. Because if the FIA decides to act, there will be no room for reaction. There will be no time to redesign or adapt the car. They would simply lose that advantage immediately. Because as soon as Ferrari focuses on the Mercedes front wing, the story stops being technical and becomes an open battle. It is no coincidence that they were the ones who raised their voices, because they are precisely one of the teams that is suffering the most from that difference in straight lines. They have seen the data, they have compared telemetries, and they have understood that they are not competing on equal terms. That is why the pressure is not only from the media, it is direct towards the FIA, seeking immediate clarification before the situation gets out of hand. And this is where the real danger comes in for Mercedes. When a rival team manages to move the conversation from how well they did it to this should not be allowed, the next step is almost always an intervention. Because the FIA not only explicitly regulates what is illegal, it also protects the spirit of the regulations, and in this case that spirit is clearly at issue. The Mercedes system, with this deliberate delay in closing the front wing, breaks the synchronization that is supposed to exist between both axles of the car, generating an advantage that was not contemplated when the rules were designed. The most critical thing is that this system is not something isolated or secondary. It is the core of the car's performance in one of the most important moments, exiting the curve onto a straight line. This is where overtaking is built, where the position is protected, where the tires are managed. And Mercedes has managed to optimize that moment like no other team, creating a kind of magic zone in which they have more grip when they need it and less resistance when they no longer require it. It is a double-chained, perfectly designed advantage. But that perfection now turns against them because the more obvious the advantage, the more pressure it generates. And the more pressure, the more likely the FIA will act. In fact, we are no longer in the realm of speculation. There is a formal investigation underway, which means that the data is being analyzed, that the agency's engineers are reviewing behaviors, transition times, and comparing them with what the regulations dictate. And here appears the scenario that no one at Mercedes wants to face. The worst of all, that the FIA determines that although the system is not illegal in its construction, it is illegal in its effect. Because that's the key point. What is poorly designed is not always punished, but what generates an advantage considered unfair. And if that happens, Mercedes would not only have to modify the system, it would have to do it immediately. No margin, no excuses, no time to adapt. Imagine what that means right before Suzuka. A circuit where every millisecond in the aerodynamic transition matters, where the car's balance is pushed to the limit in fast, linked corners, and where losing that stability on corner exit can completely destroy straight-line performance. Mercedes would go from having one of the most complete cars to one completely exposed. And meanwhile, the rest of the teams watch. Some waiting for the FIA to act. Others analyzing if they can replicate something similar before they ban it. Because that's how Formula One works. When someone finds an advantage, everyone runs to copy it or eliminate it. Mercedes no longer only has a secret exposed. She now has a countdown on top of her. Every hour that passes brings them closer to a decision that could define their season. And the most disturbing thing of all is that that decision no longer depends on them. The arrival at Suzuka is no longer just another race on the calendar. It is a turning point. Because Mercedes arrives with two completely opposite scenarios on the table, and both are extreme. In the first, the FIA decides that the system falls within the interpretable limits of the regulations, which would mean a total green light. And if that happens, the message to the rest of the grid would be devastating. Mercedes has not only found an advantage, it has found the advantage. Because on a circuit like Japan, where each aerodynamic transition defines the overall performance of the car, this behavior of the front wing could make them practically untouchable in key sectors, especially at the exit of linked corners where balance is everything. But the second scenario is the one that really weighs on the team. Because if the FIA intervenes, if it decides that this delay in closing the front wing violates the spirit of the regulations, then everything collapses suddenly. We are not talking about a small correction, we are not talking about losing a few tenths. We are talking about eliminating the element that supports all the performance logic of the car on a straight line and in traction. And that, on a Grand Prix weekend, is practically a sentence. Because removing that system is not just removing top speed, it is changing the entire behavior of the car. It means losing stability when exiting corners, it means punishing the tires more, it means forcing the drivers to drive a much more nervous, more unpredictable car. Right on a circuit that does not forgive this type of weakness. Suzuka is not a track where you can hide problems, on the contrary, it exposes them lap after lap. And this is where the blow may be even deeper than it seems. Because if Mercedes is forced to modify its design, it not only loses immediate performance, it also loses development direction. Everything they have built, everything they have optimized around that concept, stops making sense. It's like removing the central piece of an already assembled puzzle. And rebuilding that in the middle of the season is practically impossible. Meanwhile, Ferrari and the rest of the teams aren't just watching, they're waiting. Waiting for that moment when the FIA makes a decision that rebalances the game. Because they know that if Mercedes maintains that system, the advantage can be consolidated race after race. But they also know that if they fall, a brutal opportunity opens up to close the gap or even change the competitive order. Because in the end, the big question is no longer whether Mercedes was brilliant. The real question is, was it worth risking everything for an advantage that could disappear at any moment? And so we come to the end of this story, a story that is not just about speed nor innovation, but about how far a team is willing to go to win in Formula One. Mercedes has shown something that very few can do: find an advantage where no one else was looking, reinterpret a complex regulation, and turn a simple aerodynamic transition into a decisive weapon. They have been brilliant, yes, but also extremely aggressive. And in this sport, that line between genius and controversy is so fine that it often ends up taking its toll. Because what today places them as a straight reference, tomorrow can become the reason for their fall. The front wing trick is not just a technical solution, it is a reflection of how Formula One really works. A constant game of limits, where each team tries to push a little further than what is allowed without completely breaking it. But this time, Mercedes hasn't just pushed the limit, it has stretched it to the limit, and now it all depends on whether the FIA decides that limit has already been crossed. And that's what makes this moment so decisive. Because if the system is maintained, Mercedes can consolidate an advantage that will mark an epoch in this new era. But if it is banned, they will not only lose performance, they will lose the heart of their concept, their greatest strength, and probably the direction of their season. In the end, beyond the technique, beyond the politics, a clear lesson remains. In Formula One, it is not just the fastest who wins. The one who best understands how far he can go without being stopped wins. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.